The night she left, she took nothing but a duffel bag, her car keys, and a secret she hadn't yet figured out how to carry. That was 3 years ago. Now she was standing in the break room of St. Jude's Medical Center at 6 in the morning, drinking coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard, and thinking about how she hadn't slept more than 4 consecutive hours since the twins were born. Her name was Reyna Ashford. She was 31 years old. She was a pediatric resident. She had 2 kids who called her mama and 1 ex-husband who didn't know they existed. She poured the rest of her coffee down the drain and went back to work. There's a particular kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. Reyna had learned this in medical school, confirmed it in residency, and had it carved permanently into her bones. The morning she gave birth to 2 babies alone in a hospital 3 states away from everyone she'd ever known. The nurse who held her hand was named Gloria. Reyna still thought about Gloria sometimes, the way she'd squeezed her fingers during the worst of it and said, "You're doing great, honey." Nobody had said anything like that to her in a long time. She named them Theo and Margot. She'd picked names that had nothing to do with anyone. Clean names. Names that belonged only to them. Theo was the one who never stopped moving. He'd been that way since, before he was born, restless and insistent, always pushing against whatever contained him. Margot was different. Margot watched everything with those dark, serious eyes and processed it quietly, and then came back 3 days later with a question that was somehow exactly right. At 2 years old, she had already made Reyna feel, on multiple occasions, like she was being gently outsmarted. They lived in a rental house on the east side of Portland with a backyard full of dandelions that Margot called flowers and Theo called not flowers, and that Reyna called fine. They're fine. Everything is fine. She dropped them at daycare every morning at 7, worked her shift, picked them up at 6, made dinner, bathed them, read to them, collapsed, repeated it, found small moments of joy in the repetition, found larger moments of exhaustion in it too. She didn't regret leaving. She had to say that clearly, even just to herself, on the mornings when it felt like the walls were closing in. She did not regret it. What she had left behind was not a life she could have survived. What she regretted was simpler and more complicated than that. She regretted that she hadn't seen it coming. His name was Beckett Hale. She'd met him at 26, when she was still in medical school and still believed that brilliant people with complicated edges were just misunderstood rather than actually dangerous. He was 32. He ran a private equity firm that his father had built and that he had made 3 times larger through a combination of genuine intelligence and a complete absence of mercy. He was the kind of man who filled a room not because he was loud, but because everyone in the room was always watching to see what he would do next. She had fallen in love with him the way you fall off a cliff, gradually, and then all at once, and then screaming. For 2 years it was extraordinary. He was attentive in a way that felt like being the only person in the world. He remembered things. The name of her organic chemistry professor she'd complained about once in passing, the specific brand of crackers she liked when she was studying late. He would show up at her apartment with food and leave without being asked, because he understood she needed quiet. She had never been with someone who understood what she needed, for she said it out loud. She didn't notice at first that he also understood what she feared, and that he filed it away. The first time he said something that made her feel small, she told herself it was stress. He was under enormous pressure. The second time, she told herself he hadn't meant it the way it sounded. By the time she stopped making excuses, they were married, and her world had quietly contracted to the size of his approval. It happened slowly. The friends who made him uncomfortable, she stopped seeing. The opportunities that would take her away for too long, she declined. She was still becoming a doctor, still putting in the hours, still fighting, but she was doing it in a smaller and smaller space, and she kept telling herself this was just how adult relationships worked. This was compromise. This was love. She found out she was pregnant on a Tuesday in March. She hadn't told him yet when she came home early from the hospital and found his business partner. Garrett? No. That name's in the file. His business partner, whose name she had trusted, whose name had meant something to her. She hadn't told him yet when she saw what she saw. She stood in the hallway of her own home for what felt like a long time. Then she walked back out to her car, sat in the driver's seat for 30 minutes. Then she drove to a pharmacy, bought 2 more pregnancy tests, took them both in a gas station bathroom, and watched them both come up positive, and understood that her life had just divided into before and after. She went home. He was already there, composed, already with his explanation arranged. He'd known she would see. He wasn't even apologetic. He was cold the way he was always cold when he thought he'd been wronged. And in his mind, she had wronged him by coming home early, by seeing something he hadn't wanted witnessed, by making this a problem he now had to manage. He told her she was overreacting. She asked him to leave. He told her that was not how this worked, that she needed to calm down and think clearly, that she had built her entire life around him, and maybe she should consider what that meant before she started making dramatic exits. She looked at him. She thought about the babies, though she didn't know that yet. And she thought about her organic chemistry professor and the crackers she'd liked when she was studying late, and she understood finally, completely, that he had learned all of those things, not because he loved her, but because he was someone who believed that knowing a person meant owning them. She packed a bag while he was making phone calls. She drove until Portland. Nobody from her old life knew she was there. She had a cousin in Seattle she'd emailed once, carefully, to say she was safe and that she needed time. And the cousin had written back okay and I love you and hadn't pushed, which was the only thing Reyna had asked for. Her parents were gone, her mother when she was 16, her father 4 years later, so there was no one to call, no one to explain things to. There was only the duffel bag and the secret and the long, flat stretch of highway that eventually delivered her to the Pacific Northwest, which felt appropriately far away. She found an OB-GYN on her 3rd day, found a studio apartment on her 5th, found a hospital willing to accept a second-year medical school transfer on the basis of her record, which was, despite everything, excellent. She was 20 weeks along when she found out it was twins. She sat in the ultrasound room looking at the screen for a long time. 2, she said. 2, the technician confirmed. Reyna lay there with cold gel on her stomach and thought, well, okay, 2. She called her cousin from the parking lot. Her cousin cried a little. Reyna didn't, but only because she'd already used up a lot of crying in the previous months and needed to be strategic about what she had left. She did not call Beckett. She had thought about it, in the beginning, thought about it with a kind of desperate fairness, the way you do when you're still trying to be a good person in a situation that doesn't reward goodness. But she thought about what he'd said that last night, about how she'd built her life around him, the precision of it, the way it was designed to make her feel like she owed him something. She thought about what he would do with the information. She thought about what kind of father he would be to children he viewed as an extension of his interests. She made her decision. She kept it every single day for 3 years. Theo started a cold in October that didn't go away the way colds were supposed to. Reyna noticed it the way she noticed everything about her kids, with the full attention of a mother who was also a doctor, which meant she noticed things other parents might have let slide for another week. The fatigue that was a little too deep, the bruising on his shin from a fall that was maybe slightly too pronounced, the color in his face that was slightly, subtly not right. She ran the blood work herself, asked a colleague she trusted to look at it with her. They looked at each other across the results. Reyna, her colleague said. I know, she said. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, highly treatable, especially in children. She said this to herself immediately and repeatedly, the doctor part of her brain pulling up the statistics, the survival rates, the protocol. Children with all had excellent outcomes. The treatment was intense, but the prognosis was good. She knew this. She knew this. She sat in her car in the hospital parking garage and pressed her hands flat on her thighs and breathed. Then she called the pediatric oncology department and scheduled an appointment. She did not let herself fall apart until she got home, after both kids were asleep, after she had checked on them twice each, after the house was quiet. Then she sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet and let herself feel it. The terror, the grief, the unfairness, the desperate animal love, and then she stood up, washed her face, and started researching treatment centers. The best pediatric oncology program in the Pacific Northwest was at Children's Institute in Seattle. It was also, as she discovered 3 weeks into Theo's treatment, where Beckett Hale's company had just completed a $50 million acquisition of a medical technology firm. She found out from a newspaper article in the hospital waiting room, which felt like the kind of joke the universe tells you when it wants to remind you that it's paying attention. His photo was in the article. She hadn't looked at a photo of him in 3 years. He looked the same, exactly the same. That shouldn't have surprised her, but it did. She'd imagined, vaguely, that some of what she'd been through would be visible on him somehow, that it would have changed him. It hadn't. He was standing in front of a building in downtown Seattle, talking to someone, and he looked like a man who had never once lost a night of sleep over anything he'd done. She put the newspaper face down on the seat next to her. She had been careful. She had a different last name now. She'd gone back to her mother's maiden name, Ashford, shortly after she arrived in Portland. She'd never posted publicly about the twins. Her address wasn't findable. She'd been careful in the specific, practiced way of someone who had thought clearly about all the ways she could be found and had sealed each one. But careful is not the same as invisible. She understood this. She told herself it was a city of 750,000 people. The chances of crossing paths with him were absurdly small. She told herself this for 6 weeks. It was Margot who saw him first. They were in the hospital lobby. Reyna had brought Margot with her on a Saturday appointment because daycare was closed and she hadn't been able to find coverage. And Margot had been beautifully, solemnly well-behaved the entire morning, sitting next to Theo and holding his hand and periodically patting it in a way that made the nurses visibly emotional. They were leaving. Reyna was carrying the diaper bag and holding Margot's hand and thinking about where she was going to find parking validation, and Margot tugged her hand and pointed and said, with the directness of a child who has not yet learned to whisper, "Mama, that man is looking at you." Reyna looked up. Beckett was standing 20 feet away. He wasn't looking at her, actually. Not yet. He was talking to someone in a suit, turned slightly sideways, and she caught his profile and the specific way he held his shoulders and felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the hospital air conditioning. Margot tugged her hand again. "Mama?" Reyna turned them both away, found an elevator, got inside it, and stood very still as the doors closed. Margot looked up at her with those dark, serious eyes. "Who was that man?" Margot asked. "Someone from a long time ago," Reyna said. "It's okay, baby." Margot considered this the way she considered everything, carefully and in full. "Okay," she said, and did not ask anything else. Reyna spent the drive home trying to talk herself down from the thing coiling in her chest. It was possible he hadn't seen her. It was possible he had seen her and not recognized her. Her hair was different. She was tired in ways that had rearranged her face. 3 years was 3 years. It was possible she was spiraling over nothing. She got home, settled Theo in front of a show, put Margot down for her nap, stood in the kitchen with her hands on the counter, and thought very hard about what she would do if he had seen her. She didn't come up with a good answer. He called her at 8:30 the next morning. She didn't recognize the number, which was the only reason she answered. Her professional instincts, she was always reachable, always, were the only thing that kept her phone in her hand in those first 2 rings. Reyna. 1 word. That was all it took. 3 years of building her life into something solid, and 1 word in his voice undid the whole geography of her. She said nothing. "I saw you," he said, "yesterday, in the lobby." She closed her eyes. "I want to talk," he said. "That's all. I just want to talk." She thought about what he'd said 3 years ago, about how she'd built her life around him. She thought about what that voice had done to her when she used to love him, how she had been so fluent in every shade of it, how it had become its own language she'd had to slowly, painstakingly unlearn. "There's nothing to say," she said. "Reyna, don't call this number again." She hung up. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat on her thighs. She'd noticed she did that when she was trying to hold herself together, press her palms flat against something stable, and she breathed until the shaking stopped. Then she called her cousin. Her cousin, to her credit, did not say "I told you so," even though she had gently and once only, 2 years ago, suggested that Reyna had perhaps created a situation that would eventually become complicated. She just listened and then she said, "What do you need?" "I don't know yet," Reyna said. "Okay," her cousin said. "I'm here." He didn't call again. She half expected him to. She knew how he operated, the patience of him, the way he was strategic about everything, including waiting. He would let her think she'd won the exchange, and then he would appear again, from a direction she hadn't protected. 2 weeks later, he was in the lobby of Theo's hospital when she arrived for treatment. He wasn't there for her, or he wasn't only there for her. He was there for a board meeting, one of his company's meetings, the kind that happened in conference rooms on the 6th floor and had nothing to do with pediatric oncology. She found this out from a hospital administrator who mentioned it casually while Reyna was trying to keep her heart rate at something that wasn't going to get her readmitted. He saw her. She couldn't pretend otherwise. He was across the lobby, and his eyes found her the way they always had, unerringly, like she was a fixed point he'd memorized. This time he crossed the lobby. She had Theo in the stroller and Margot beside her, and approximately 0 good options. Reyna, he stopped 6 feet away. He was looking at her, then at Theo, then at Margot, with her dark, serious eyes that were watching him with the same careful attention she applied to everything. His expression did something complicated. Reyna said, "Beckett." Her voice was level. She'd been a doctor for 3 years. She had learned to be level. "These are your children," he said. "Not a question." "Yes," she said. She watched him do the math. She watched it land. She watched the thing move through his face. Not emotion, exactly, not first, but the particular expression of a person confronting information that reconfigures everything they thought they knew. "How old?" he said, and his voice had gone quiet in a way she didn't remember. 2.5, she said. The silence between them was the longest she'd ever stood inside. "Reyna," he said. Just that. Just her name again, but different this time. Something she didn't know what to do with. "I have an appointment," she said. She moved past him. He let her go. She felt him watching them all the way to the elevator. He was waiting outside the hospital when they left, 3 hours later. She'd known he would be. This was the thing about knowing someone very well. The knowing doesn't go away, just because the love does. She knew how he thought. She knew what he did when he wanted something. He waited until he had thought through every angle, and then he appeared, prepared. He was standing by the entrance with his hands in his pockets and his face arranged into something that was not the coldness she remembered from the end. It was something else. She didn't have a name for it. "I'm not leaving," he said. "I'm not going to make a scene. I just want to understand." Margot was asleep in the stroller. Theo was leaning against Reyna's leg, tired from his treatment, his hand wrapped around her fingers. Beckett looked at Theo, really looked at him, the way she'd watched him look at things he was trying to understand rather than manage. "He's sick," he said. "He's in treatment," Reyna said. "He's going to be fine." "What does he have?" She hesitated. Then she told him. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because she was tired. Maybe because some part of her was still a doctor who understood that relevant medical history was relevant. Maybe because the look on Beckett's face was doing something to the walls she'd built that she didn't have the energy to reinforce right now. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When she was done, he said quietly, "What do you need?" She stared at him. "For treatment," he said. "Specialists. Access. Whatever he needs. Whatever they both need. I can make it happen. I don't care what it costs. I don't care what you think of me. Tell me what they need." She had prepared for so many versions of this conversation. She had prepared for demands, for threats, for the cold precision she remembered. She had not prepared for this. "Beckett, I know why you left," he said. "I know what I did. I know what I was." He was looking at Theo. "Still. I spent a year not understanding, and 2 years understanding too clearly and not knowing what to do with it." He looked at her. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not trying to take anything. He stopped, started again. "They're mine too." "Yes," she said. It was the first time she'd said it out loud to anyone. The word felt enormous. "You should have told me," he said. "I know what you would have done with the information," she said. "At the time. I know who you were." "Yes," he said. "You're right." She looked at him for a long moment. Theo tugged her hand, ready to go home, and she looked down at her son, at his face, which had pieces of her in it, and pieces of Beckett in it, and pieces of something entirely his own, and she felt the whole weight of the 3 years pressing down on her, all the decisions she'd made, and the ones she'd unmade, all the nights on the kitchen floor, and the mornings she'd gotten up and done it all over again. "You don't get to come in and fix everything," she said. "It doesn't work like that. I know. They don't know who you are. Theo is sick. Margot is 2.5 and she doesn't need upheaval right now. If you want to be part of this, if you are going to be part of this, it happens on my terms, slowly, in a way that protects them." He held her gaze. "Okay, I mean it, Beckett. I know you do." Something shifted in his face. "You always meant what you said. I just wasn't listening." She didn't have an answer to that. She put Theo in the car, buckled him in, folded the stroller, strapped Margot in, and did all the small, careful things she did 100 times a week that had become the architecture of her life. When she was done, she stood by the driver's door. "Give me a month," she said. "Don't call. Don't show up. Give me a month to think." He nodded. "And I'm not promising anything," she said. "Not to you. Everything I do is for them." "I know," he said. "That's all I'd ask." She got in the car and drove. The month was hard. She talked to her cousin, to her therapist, to a family law attorney, whose number she got from a colleague, and called from a parking lot on her lunch break. She made no decisions from fear. She made no decisions from longing either, even on the nights when longing ambushed her, for someone to help carry the weight, for her kids to have a father, for something easier than the life she'd built. She made decisions from clarity. She thought about who Beckett had been. She thought about who he might have become, not who he was claiming to be right now, in the charged, consequence-heavy moment of discovery, but who he might actually be in an ordinary week, in the small daily moments that were really what life was made of. She didn't know the answer to that yet. What she knew was that Theo was going to need a bone marrow transplant if the second round of treatment didn't hold. The doctors had told her this gently but plainly, the way she herself spoke to parents in her clinic, not wanting to alarm, but needing them to understand the road ahead. They were testing donors. Family donors were always preferred. She sat with that for a long time. Then she called Beckett. "I need you to get tested," she said. "For bone marrow compatibility, it's precautionary. We may not need it. But I need it done." "When?" he said. "This week, if you can." "I'll go tomorrow." No hesitation. She'd braced for negotiation, and he'd offered none. "Okay," she said. "Can I?" He stopped. "What? Can I ask how he's doing? Just how is he?" Today, she thought about saying that's not what this call is about. She thought about the walls. Then she thought about Theo, who had been trying to teach Margot how to build a block tower that morning, patient and bossy in equal measure, coaching her through each placement with the seriousness of a child who had decided this was important. "He's having a good week," she said. "He's been teaching his sister to build things." The silence on Beckett's end had a particular quality. She recognized it because she'd heard it before, not from him, but from parents in her clinic when she told them good news. The sound of someone trying to breathe around something that was too big for a normal breath. "That's good," he said. "Yeah," she said, "it is." He was compatible. The results came back on a Thursday. Reyna sat in her car and read the lab report twice, and then put her phone face down on the passenger seat and stared at the windshield. She called him that evening, after the kids were in bed. "You're a match," she said. A long pause. "Okay," he said. "What do I need to do?" "We don't know yet if we'll need it," she said. "The second protocol is showing response. But if we do, I'll do it," he said. "Whatever the process is, whatever it takes." She believed him. That was the thing she hadn't expected. She believed him. Not because he'd changed necessarily, or because she'd forgiven everything, or because she'd decided to trust him again in the full unguarded way she'd trusted him once before, but because she was a person who'd spent 3 years getting very good at reading situations clearly, without the distortion of wanting things to be different than they were, and what she read now was a man who was, very simply, willing. She didn't know what that meant yet. She was still figuring that out. What she knew was that Margot had started asking, recently, about fathers, the way 2-year-olds asked, sidewise, in the middle of other things, matter-of-factly, a question and then immediately back to whatever she was coloring. Caden at daycare has a dad. Do we have a dad? Reyna had answered carefully. You have a mama who loves you. Lots of families look different ways. Margot had accepted this and gone back to her drawing, but she'd asked twice more in the following week, and Reyna understood that questions that come back are questions that matter. She didn't make any big decisions that night. She wasn't built for big decisions made in the dark. But she let herself think, carefully, with her hands flat on her thighs and her eyes open, about the shape of things. About what it might look like to give her children their father without giving up the self she'd spent 3 years building. About what it might look like to do that slowly, on her terms, in a way that put Theo and Margot first every single time. It didn't look like trust. Not yet. It looked like a first step. It looked like Beckett sitting in a lab on a Thursday morning, rolling up his sleeve, doing the one thing she'd asked without asking for anything back. It looked like Reyna driving home through the October dark, thinking, maybe. Not yet, but maybe. Theo was awake when she got home, which he wasn't supposed to be, sitting in the hallway with his blanket and his most unreasonable look. Mama, he said, with the gravity of a person who has been waiting for quite some time. Theo, she said. You're supposed to be asleep. I was waiting, he said. She sat down on the hallway floor beside him, and he climbed into her lap with his blanket, and she held him and thought about all the things she was still figuring out and how she was going to figure them out, and how, regardless of what came next. She had built something real here, something that had started as running away and had somehow, mile by mile and day by day, become running toward this city, toward this hospital, toward this life, toward these two small specific people who needed her to be brave in ways she hadn't known she was capable of. She pulled him closer. Outside, the October rain was starting. It tapped against the windows, steady and even, the sound of something continuing. I'm here, she told him. He pressed his face against her shoulder. I know, he said. I was just making sure.